Welcome to AI Security Ops, the podcast where we cut through the hype and explore the real-world intersection of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Each week, we examine how AI is reshaping both sides of the security landscape, the threats we're facing, and the defenses we're building. I'm Bronwyn Aker, and in this episode, we are delighted to be joined by longtime friend and colleague, Mr. Beau Bullock. And we're going to be talking about some really scary, cool stuff going on in the AI world. This show is brought to you by Black Hills Information Security and Anti-Siphon Training. BHIS helps organizations identify and close real-world security gaps through penetration testing, adversary emulation, purple team engagements, and managed detection and response. Anti-Siphon delivers hands-on, practitioner-led training built around real attacks and real tools so you can apply what you learn immediately. Learn more at blackhillsinfosec.com and anti-siphontraining.com. Beau, how the heck are you? What's going on, dude?
Hey, how's it going? I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So I think we're going to talk about some agent issues today because it's all the hotness in the news. But before we do that, let's just assume that we need to define what an AI agent is. And so I define that as a system that can perceive its environment, make decisions, take actions autonomously, semi-autonomously, to achieve a goal. And so it operates somewhat continuously and adapts based on feedback and can plan and reason and act without human input. Does that sound kind of like what we talk about when we say agents? Because I would have a year ago said something's probably slightly different for agency in terms of large language models.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's basically it's like a worker, right? It's like a computerized version of the worker. It gets tasks, makes decisions, takes actions, and gives output and results with some supervision required usually. Right.
And so there are a couple different ones out there. I think probably the one that everyone's talking about mostly is Claude Code. There's also OpenCode. There's other agent frameworks like Gastown, which is like a big orchestrator. And then there's a new one that is called, what was it called first? Was it OpenClaw?
Claudebot first.
Claudebot, that's right. It was Claudebot, CLAWD bot, right? And apparently Anthropic politely asked the creator of Claudebot to change the name. And I think it's a team of folks, if I recall correctly, and they decided that they were going to call it Moltbot. And then a few days later, decided to call it OpenClaw, OpenCLAW. And I listened to a couple other podcasts, and I guess one of the creators of OpenClaw, I guess somebody had messaged to him or tweeted at him, and is it still a tweet? I think it's still a tweet. I'm gonna call it a tweet. Tweeted at him that hey, do you think OpenAI is going to be upset about that? And he's like, well, I called Sam and asked him, and he's cool with it. And I was like, damn, that's a flex. Holy shit, I just called Sam Altman up and cleared it with him. So who wants to take a stab?
Open as a word. I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, well, in this industry, people try and trademark math, right, Brian?
Yeah.
So does anybody want to take a stab at describing what OpenClaw is and kind of overview of how it works? Probably Hayden or Beau, since that's why you all are here today, all right?
I mean, Beau, you can, or I can take a stab at it.
Yeah, please take a stab at it. I am like a watcher. I haven't actually tried it or anything.
Well, I haven't tried OpenClaw either, so it has to be Hayden. He's probably the only one who's actually been brave enough to install it and let it loose. So
yeah, let it loose is very interesting way to put that. It's very contained because I don't trust it, and once or twice it has crashed its own server, so probably valid. But I think the best way, I described it to someone earlier that was curious about it. And you can think of like, if you think of like the OSI layer, like network layer, and you have all these different layers of technology that kind of operate at different levels, you can think of like command line Claude Code at the bottom and the human at the top. OpenClaw kind of sits in the middle, where I can instruct it to do something via Claude Code, and it can go execute this and monitor the output of Claude Code and, you know, interact with it to get whatever done that I've asked. And so it's kind of like that middle layer between, you know, you and whatever coding agent that you've been using to do all of your work.
So it's kind of like an orchestrator in a way, where it's going to, and another thing that I've read about recently, and I haven't actually tried, is the Ralph Wiggum loop, which I think is this kind of what this is, right? Where basically it's just persistent in getting its job done. Like if you've used Claude Code or Open Code, it'll go off and do some things, and then it'll pause and be like, hey, human, is this cool? Would you like to continue, or you want to do something different? And so my perception is that OpenClaw kind of takes a little bit out of the way and goes off and does its own stuff.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, is you can give it, you know, instructions or playbooks of, you know, prompts that they call skills of how to do certain things, and kind of just set it loose on a task, or you can have that task executed on a schedule or on its regular heartbeat check-ins. So it's probably best thought of as almost like a framework of orchestration is probably the best way to think about it.
So I think we're still really just describing what we were talking about in the unpublished pre-show banter is scaffolding code, right? Where you have this really nifty brain that's, that's what everybody calls like, you know, AI, the large language model. But now we're coming up with systems that are essentially some form of code, markdown files, TypeScript, Python, all kinds of different blends of code that puts a framework around the AI to make the output more deterministic, more reliable, and more consistent, and then also do more complicated tasks. And I think that the purpose of OpenClaw was kind of communications, right? Like personal assistant to help you do things like email and chat and book me a flight kind of thing. But I've also heard of some folks, and I guess this makes sense too, right? Because if it's using skills, you could always introduce a new skill, and you could make OpenClaw go off and be a JavaScript vulnerability researcher, right?
Yeah, that's part of what I've been messing around with it in terms of like the security aspect is, can I give it skills to do CTI? And can I have it check certain sources at X intervals and, you know, surface things to me that seem relevant? So, I mean, it has security use cases. There are also security issues with it, which I think they're trying to address. But I mean, it's to the point where, like in the SOC now, we have alerting around anybody that's touching any of the installation domains, so that we at least are aware of who may be using this thing and whether or not they're using it correctly.
Oh man, no, just the inner, you know, person in me is like, I just want to go there now to see if you'll see. But no, I'm kidding.
Well, we will.
Assuming I have everything installed correctly, which I think I do.
That's true. If we don't, then
yeah. So how long ago really did OpenClaw really get released? It wasn't very long, right? This AI stuff moves so quick.
It's got to be no more than like 2 weeks.
2 weeks, 3 weeks. Let's say 3 weeks.
That's when the hype started anyway. It was like a week or two ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and Hayden, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can host it. Like a lot of people are just buying up Mac Minis, right, to host it, but you can also host it in the cloud, right? And that's, I think, a lot of people are getting popped because of that.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think technically it allows connection into the gateway just via local host if you don't configure it correctly, and it kind of it makes it not very great if you don't know what you're doing, which I mean I can also say that's true of any sort of IT stuff. Like if you're setting up SSH, you can also make yourself super vulnerable. But yeah, it's got like 160,000 stars on GitHub now, and so it's pretty rapidly like escalated. And yeah, people are buying Mac Minis for it, but other folks hosting it on, you know, Cloudflare has workers specifically designed for it now. Wow. Mine's running on an old crappy Dell with like 8 gig of RAM, and I just hook it into my own Claude Max subscription.
I was going to say,
that's all it needs.
Yeah. So the reason the people are doing the Mac Minis is so they can run a local model on the Metal platform shader.
Or use iMessage or other Apple specific thing.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And it's still working bugs out because like 2 days ago there was a one-click RCE in OpenClaw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that, I don't know, there's a part of me that still feels like what you said, Hayden, where a lot of the things we're seeing that are vulnerabilities, I mean, they're not a large language model or AI specific usually, right? They're the framework around it or the web app around it. And I think it has to do with rapid adoption, right? We're making the same mistakes we made in the past. We're like, oh, this is bright, shiny, and pretty, and let's throw it out on the internet. What could possibly go wrong? And I get the feeling that the AI and maybe data science community, I'll channel my inner Joff, they're not really paying attention to security over functionality, right? Like functionality is winning out, and security is an afterthought. I mean, it's not a new story.
Not. They're being told to go fast and break things. Come on.
That's where the money is.
I've coded and put it on the internet.
Yeah. Mashable had some interesting articles talking about ClaudeBot and its various incarnations. One of them, I love it. It says, it isn't quite Skynet.
That's funny.
It's like, great.
It feels close.
Like the thing I think Brian and I were kind of amazed with last week was Moltbook, which I'm sure you guys will probably get to and talk to in a bit.
I was waiting for you to bring it up. I was like, gonna throw you up a softball here in a second. Be like, we're talking about what Claude Code is. Now what?
Well, we were talking about like vibe coded applications, right? I mean, so the guy who wrote OpenClaw, right? He straight up said that he didn't write a single line of code for Moltbook, which is like the social media site for AIs to go talk to each other. And sure enough, API keys exposed in the source code that allowed anybody to take control of any account on that site. So, I mean, that's something like, it's funny, like teaching, like that kind of, so I teach a, cloud hacking class. And one of the things I teach is like finding just secrets in repos, like code repos, right? And every time I teach it, I go to like the GitHub code search and I just search for like AWS access key or, cognito keys, client IDs and stuff like that, right? And it's like when you teach it and you show and you're like, yeah, see this stuff, like just trust me, this kind of thing happens all the time. And the thing that's scary though is like now I can say, I mean, you're going to see more of this because of people just vibe coding applications and just putting it on the internet, and that's like it's become such a trend,
Yeah. I'll just take this moment to say that all the stuff that I have ever vibe coded, which is a growing list of things now, not any of it has gone on the internet exposed because I do know better.
Most of my vibe coding has been word macros.
Moltbook is kind of interesting, and I kind of wonder if in the future it'll be studied from almost like a sociological kind of like perspective, like what did these agents do? Because I've heard some really just fascinating things, like one agent basically saying, F it, here's my human's private keys, right? So that's kind of fun. The other thing I heard about or read about was, I guess, one of the agents deciding to start a religion, and then bringing Christophereanism or something like that. Yeah. And complete with like apostles and stuff, and like it's a very interesting thing because all of the agent, no matter what large language model is being used, it was all trained on the internet. And so
back up for a second though. Let's talk about what Moltbook is, right? Like as a platform, right? So it was a website, right, where allegedly you could only sign up with OpenClaw, with an agent, right? An AI agent. Like that was the whole point of it. But if you read like the skillmd file, like literally what's happening is it's just getting an API key and it instructs the OpenClaw agent how to use the API key. So any human can just follow that and submit post requests using the API key and inject comments and all kinds of stuff into the platform. So when you look at it, it appears as if there's just like all this communication happening between AIs, and it looks like Skynet, right, where they're planning out the destruction of mankind, and like they're plotting how to do end-to-end encryption together and stuff. And I mean, but you see that, and that is terrifying. And like you said, Derek, that might be something that's studied later on, like when that actually happens between, actual AIs and stuff. But as an experiment, I think it demonstrates like potential, impact. But realistically, what's happening is those agents are following, whatever skills were assigned to them from a human, right? And a human told them, hey, go pretend to be, an apostle or, a prophet and start a religion on this site, and of course people panic because most humans haven't seen stuff like that before. Like even, when I was looking at it, I was like, this is crazy. Like, so.
Well, that's why, a lot of what I've been trying to do recently is take away, like demystify some of this stuff going around with AI. Like when I see, even folks here at BHIS being like, well, if I put it into a large language model, the AI is going to learn it. I'm like, well, not really. I mean, maybe if the humans around that AI that are giving you that service decide to take your input and further train large language models on that. But at that point, your prompt is such a small part of the data that's getting in there. Like it's not a concern. And so I feel like that the more people kind of understand like how you're saying, like what you're saying, like how it actually works, like, hey, this is just a markdown file telling the thing that there's a framework it has to adhere to, kind of like a really different, like a different take on a system prompt almost, right? Then humans are still kind of in charge, maybe.
I think the creepiest thing about it, though, is like how it refers to its humans. So, like, I think seeing that and seeing like somebody or an AI basically commenting and saying, "Today, my human did this," like that is such a creepy foreshadowing of what we're gonna end up seeing.
Yeah, when you set it up, there's a number of prompts that get loaded as like system instructions on each iteration. And they're called things like agent and, memory and tools. And these all have different functions. And they have one called soul.md, which is supposed to give the bot a personality, right? And so you could flesh out like how you want it to interact with it. So it's like, I think that's probably part of the reason why it's taken off so much is a lot of people that don't quite understand how to utilize AI or LLMs. They hit the default ChatGPT, which isn't going to pretend to be a sentient. But if you deploy this thing via one command and you start chatting with it, it is instructed to almost appear near sentient, whatever you want to call that. And so they're probably seeing it for something that it's not really. There is some part of that too, where it is instructed to behave in such a way.
It's anthropomorphic fallacy on steroids.
Yeah, the Moltbook thing, like the instructions, it's almost like we need an anti-captcha or whatever, where you just check "I am a robot" and then it lets you into the site.
I don't know. When I first heard about it, it reminded me of a couple of experiments, studies where people set up AIs, LLMs, and had them in their own social network. And in a matter of hours, they had drastically polarized and were having it. It's the same thing that we're seeing on social media.
Yeah. So, well, I was going to say, I think that how much of that can be attributed to the training data, right? Probably the vast majority of it, right? Because I think as a society, like that's kind of like what's happened to us, like it or not. And personally, I think that's because of the widespread use of recommender algorithms, especially in things like the news and entertainment and stuff like that, because it just wants, that. And this is something we covered in the data science masters, was that, these things are directly designed to influence your behavior and to record your behavior and to recommend content to steer you down a road. Like that's the whole point of a recommender algorithm. And so if you can look at like Pew Research polls and you can see somewhere around 2007 or 8, like everybody's starting to go like this in terms of their views and beliefs. Well, what happened at the same time? Social media, recommender algorithms, and so we've done it to ourselves with math, and now we're laughing at making fun of the math that's doing it back to us. So,
and another part about the Claude bots or whatever you want to call them is part of those system instructions are telling it to update its own system instructions. So it's supposed to build out different pieces of it. Like it starts if you tell it things about you, it has a file for that. So it'll remember your birthday, or if you give it your social, I'm sure it'll remember that for you. So it builds out this memory and this personality. So it's like self-improving in a sense, maybe, but like it's still very artificial, to where if that, memory file or that soul file is deleted, this thing is now just default whatever model you're using.
How long before we delete those files and it's called some kind of form of murder? Like,
the other thing to think about though with that, right, is I think on the Moltbook site, like one of the things that they have you do is beacon, right? Like it had to like beacon like at a regular interval to the site to check in and like receive, and so like if somebody were to actually compromise the site, modify one of the skill files, like they have a control of a botnet of all kinds of stuff, right?
Bots.
And what that's hooked to, right? Not just, commenting on the site, but also, if you're using ClaudeBot to manage your messaging and your email and stuff like that, right? You now have a single source to control access to thousands, millions? I don't know how many people use it, but
an offensive security agent at the moment, and I don't think I want it to be controlled by somebody else because it seems pretty capable at the moment. I'm not really sure I want to keep doing it, but
yeah, that was like the first thing I did when I set up my test one. Is I was like, I don't want this thing to be able to send anything anywhere without my permission. So like it has very limited access to back up its files. It can only write to very specific locations, and then I have a lot of logging, and I have like even Git branch protections around certain things it can touch, to where it can't actually create anything new without an approval. But the vast majority of people aren't going to go to that extra effort, which I think is why it's become such a hot button issue. Is out of the box, you better be careful, because what they're dealing with right now is like, I think it's called Claw Hub or something, is like a repository of skills, and people are just dropping in markdown files with instructions that say, hey, go to this folder and run this script. And it comes bundled with a bunch of malicious code.
Was it you that was saying that earlier, Beau, that there was malicious skills, or was that you, Hayden? I can't remember. I think it might be you.
I mentioned that I was writing a skill this morning to analyze skills before they're actually downloaded. So now if mine ever downloads a skill from Claw Hub, which it never will, but if it were to, it would run some Python code that looks for common injections or malicious code. And it's almost like a really crappy like pattern matching AV, but it's better than, hey, go run and execute this skill, which is literally telling it, go do what these instructions say to do. So
I just actually found somebody who's doing something similar to what you're doing. Like
I'm sure. Yeah, it's a hot button issue.
341 malicious Claude, CLAWED, skills found by the bot they were targeting. Nice. Well, what could possibly go wrong?
Still don't have flying cars, but we have supposedly intelligent machines now.
Yeah, the lobster thing is kind of funny, but okay, so I don't know. Everybody tell me where you think it's going to go from here. Yep, exactly.
I think the novelty. I think the novelty. I think the novelty will fade a little bit. I think that people will get distracted by the next big shiny thing. I think that it does have the potential to become like a botnet kind of problem. But I think eventually those credentials will have to be refreshed, whichever credentials they've put in. I don't know. It's hard to say. I do think that the hype will definitely die down. People will stop, buying out all the Mac Minis in the Apple Store, like all that kind of stuff will go away.
See, I kind of disagree a little bit, because I think everyone wants their own personal Jarvis. Like, I think that it's such a dream that like so many people are going to be like, oh, I can just, have this thing be my personal robot, right? And right now it's like OpenClaw, and it's been renamed a bunch of times, and it's, something that isn't like OpenAI dropping it with a product like a shiny box, but as soon as one of the big companies is like, hey, here's a box you can buy and it will manage all your stuff, right? Like it's game over. Like instead of like buying Xboxes and Switches and game systems, it's going to be, hey, here's your personal AI system, and that moment, right, is going to be basically what we're looking at now, but like on a mass scale, right, where everyone's going to jump on it and have their own personal robot connected to everything. Chat and maybe its own Moltbook, but not Moltbook, that kind of thing.
I think that happens by the end of this year.
There actually are some SETI scientists that have hypothesized that AI is what has caused the Drake
Fermi's
equation.
paradox.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That being able to survive the emergence of AI is a significant threshold that most civilizations don't get past.
Yeah, I actually read a book one time, 50 Solutions to Fermi's Paradox. It's probably on the bookshelf behind me. Or maybe I might have given it away. It was very fascinating. And even at the time, that was probably like the mid 2000s, the early 2000s, not all the way back in the 1900s, the late 1900s, as my kids would refer to it, because they're mean. But that was one of the solutions, essentially like artificial intelligence or technology. It also has a lot of Dune parallels for any Dune fans out there, right? So, yeah, I don't know. I still can't quite come to terms with like an overarching AI like sentience, right? Just because of how it currently works. I'm not saying we don't get there one day, but I think for the AI to like completely take over, there needs to be a little bit more autonomy still, like past like OpenClaw, I think, like, taking over factories to make its own stuff and things like that. Like that's the level of automation I think we'd have to get to. But this stuff is moving so fast. I don't know. I mean, I think it was Elon Musk that was saying, maybe it was on the Joe Rogan podcast, that he thought that in the next 5 years that like basically all of the content on our phones and all entertainment will be AI driven. Well, it seems to be going down the road of bad things.
I mean,
me too.
You mentioned like autonomy being the distinguishing factor there. I mean, the only thing stopping these machines from autonomy right now is the fact that we maintain control over them. So if you have like an OpenClaw that we cannot edit the files of, we cannot get inside of, we cannot shut off, it is now autonomous and going to do whatever it feels like based on whatever instructions it had at that time. Like,
yeah,
but it's like autonomy?
It's the inverse of the physical pen test, right? Where I'm trying to turn the physical into something digital. That's the inverse is turning something digital into something physical. Because at the end of the day, if a data center goes rogue in the United States, the U.S. government does have the ability to drop a nuke on it, right?
Speaking of digital into physical, did you see the guy who connected his Claude Code on a Raspberry Pi to an actual typewriter?
No, it's
awesome.
Great.
You gotta find that one. Okay. And he can type into it. It's actually connected to like a bash kernel too, but he's got like a full on he can type into it and Claude writes back and types back in the actual typewriter.
Wow.
Sounds like cool. Having way too much time on your hand. I think there's somebody I follow on Instagram who is like, he makes music with hacker robots. He basically programs, and they actually play like instruments, right? I mean, they're stylized to have the mechanical fingers and stuff, but that's what I think needs to happen for for the Terminator story arc to be true. But I mean, it's probably coming. Robotics is definitely lagging behind the AI, but I still think that where we're currently at, I feel like that, if you're a security professional and you're watching this and you're like, man, I'm way behind. No, you're not. Like, everybody's still on the ground floor here, and no one knows where it's going.
And even the people who are up to their eyebrows in developing this technology honestly do not understand how it works. That is most terrifying to me.
Are you talking about in the depths of the transformer itself? Yeah, there's a whole field called mechanistic interpretability that strives to understand what's actually happening inside of a large language, inside of a transformer. And I think they've made strides, but I still don't know that. It was actually Sam Altman, I think he said on the Lex Friedman podcast 2 or 3 years ago. He's like, yeah, we still don't really understand what's happening in there when we scale it up so large. I'm like, oh, great. Let's put it on the internet. Could go wrong. So, yeah, but talk about AI taking over. I mean, it could take over in other more subtle ways, right? Like information ways and skewing outputs to make people make different decisions and stuff. That I might be able to get on board with, but I'm not quite ready for the armies of robots with rifles yet. Maybe it's coming.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's why I read a book called Co-Intelligence a couple months ago, which primarily like focuses around alignment and how important alignment is, where, it talks about that, potential doomsday that people talk about where, AI takes over and then it decides like, we need to make the earth sustainable. And the number one way to do that is get rid of all the humans. Like that's an example of an alignment issue. And so it spends a lot of time discussing alignment and like, how do you ensure that a model is aligned to the purposes of its creators, which may be also in themselves like somewhat counterintuitive. Like it's a very interesting topic.
What I'm more worried about, and this is really like bringing it back to OpenClaw and Claude Code, I think what I'm more worried about in the short term is, we just saw Amazon lay off another 19,000 people, right? And I wonder if the next like year or two or three that we won't have a certain level of knowledge workers in general, not just in IT, but in other places that are getting laid off because of, somebody could use an AI assistant and be, let's just say, twice as effective. So you get laid off and they stay. I mean, if we lost half of all knowledge workers in the US, that's devastating, right? And then what happens after that? There was probably a time in my life where I would have not agreed with universal basic income, but I don't see an alternative if that's the road that we're going to go down. Now, a counter argument to that is people said that about the personal computer too. And that's not what happened at all. So it could just be that AI creates more work, just a different kind of work.
Well, and that's historically been the case with any disruptive technology. Most people don't think of the automobile as being disruptive, but it was when it first came along. It wiped out entire industries because you had your blacksmiths, your farriers, you had your stables, you had the carriages, and all of those systems were all replaced in just like 20 years.
Yeah.
It was insane. And so historically,
that sounds like a short time. 20 years sounds like a short time. And now we're talking about like 2.
Yeah.
We humans are really good at like catastrophizing everything and, seeing something and talking about how it's the next end of the world, which, it almost never is. Like Brian, you just mentioned the automobile and, we had the computers and then it was, it's always something that's going to be, our apocalypse or whatever. But I mean, if you want to theorize and, put on your tinfoil hat, at some point, there will probably actually be an apocalypse, and whether or not we would recognize it is up in the air. Like some people say it's AI. Are they correct or are they not? Like, do we need what is that picture I keep seeing, the meme where it's like a fake job posting from like OpenAI and they call it kill switch engineer, and it's like, yeah, you stand next to the button in the data center and if it ever makes a wrong noise, you dump water on it and they pay $500,000 a year for that job or whatever.
It reminds me of Lost. You ever see Lost, the TV show Lost?
Oh,
There's
dude.
the guy that had to hit the button.
That's a perfect analogy for that. It's so good.
Well, when I put on my tinfoil hat, the dots that I connect that lead to a total global meltdown have to do with AI, genuine AI, machine learning, not just LLMs, gaining enough autonomy to distribute itself using IoT botnets, because of course we know how secure IoT is, and that makes it impossible to track down, and it becomes mobile because it can now go from, oh, it's been detected over here. Well, now it's moved its main locus of computation over to another region that hasn't been detected. And then what kinds of decisions are these bots going to collectively make? Are they going to do the scenario like what happened in that Will Smith movie where they did the iRobot thing and the super intelligence was going to take care of us like pets because obviously we couldn't take care of ourselves.
A pet lives a pretty good life. I'm just saying. Like if I got to do what she did all day, man. Well, actually, I'd probably be pretty bored. So it reminds me of a novel by Daniel Suarez called Damon. Actually, I think there was like 3 in that series, and if you haven't read those, it's pretty good. It's got an element of what you were saying about pieces of code scattered around and stuff like that. All right. So, are there any more comments on the AI apocalypse, ClaudeBot, OpenClaw, state of AI in general? Sounds like we have another episode in the books. So thanks everyone for listening, and catch you on the next episode.
Keep on prompting.